We're glad that you're here this morning. If you're new with us today, I don't believe it's an accident you're here. We believe you belong here. We believe that God has something He wants to share and speak to each of our hearts if we'll let our hearts be open to what He'd have to say to us today. Well, it's just about a month ago that my dad had his double bypass. I talked to, I'm blanking names, but he's 95 in our church, and he had his 5 bypass 19 years ago. He's 95 today. So, Dad, you're watching. That is good news for you. You got some years to go. But I'm thinking back, I may have shared this already, but just laughing at some of the things I think about when he came right out of surgery and was in some pain. And my sister said to him, "Dad, you're the toughest man I know." And he said, "No, your brother is." I started to fill up with a little bit of pride right then at that point. And then he said he played in 40 college football games and he only won 5 of them. I believe that has helped stir my compassion. I actually believe, as I watched the game last Sunday with my growth group and all of them Chiefs fan except for one bitter Cowboys fan that was rooting against them. Even this Broncos fan was rooting for the Chiefs. But I know what it is to hurt and lose. I feel a lot more sorry for my team than I do yours, because you have 15 more years of Patrick Mahomes, and we have 15 more years of trying to find a quarterback. But it does. Things that happen to us in life, in all seriousness, they feed our compassion. Without going through a loss, without going through pain, without losing a job, without experiencing the things that you've experienced in your life, it's hard to really develop compassion for things that we haven't experienced ourselves. And we're in a series, and this is the last of our series. We've been looking at the C's of parenthood. And it's only been 4 weeks, but we've really hit 5 C's. For each and every week, the central message is Christ. That Christ is the central message and the number one C. Without Christ, everything else I talk about means nothing, really gets us nowhere. But with Christ, it's the foundation of everything. So Christ has been throughout every message, but specifically we've talked about character, convictions, confidence, building, instilling those things in our kids and grandkids. And today is about compassion. Being able to understand and be able to feel what other people feel. And we're most like Jesus when we're generous and compassionate towards others. It's one of our core values. In front of you in your seats, if you're new with us today, you can look at our core values. One of them is we feel like we're most like Jesus when we're compassionate towards others. And I even believe this. I believe someone that's a non-believer or someone that's an atheist, someone that doesn't believe in God at all, I believe they reflect God without even knowing it when they're compassionate towards other people. They're reflecting the nature of God when they're compassionate towards others. So an atheist could have no idea that they're honoring God, but when they're giving and when they're compassionate towards others, they're reflecting the very nature of who God is. Our mission here is to help people follow Jesus, help people look like Jesus, help people reflect Jesus. So how do we instill and build compassion in our kids and our grandkids? And the bigger question, how do we instill compassion in ourselves? For we can't pass on what we don't already have within us. Well, if you want to follow along in your notes today, the first one is this. The first way to instill compassion in us is to learn to identify with others. Jesus did this. Jesus, who was fully God, made himself a little lower than the angels, came down from heaven, gave up his throne, came down from heaven and took his place among us, took on our human flesh so that he might identify with us. So he knows. We don't have a God that is distant. We don't have a God that doesn't feel what you feel, who hasn't felt what you felt, who hasn't experienced the brokenness and the things of this life that it brings to us. We have a God that came down, took on our flesh, although 100% God, was 100% man, so that he could identify with us. In Hebrews 4, chapter 4, verses 14 and 15, and I'm so pleased so many of you are taking the New Believers Bibles that are in the back, you're welcome to that. I had someone ask me today, can I take one of the Bibles you have in the seats today? And yes, those were given with memorial money. They're a gift that others have passed on to you. And if you're following along in either one of those two Bibles, either the New Believers Bible, page 278, or the Abundant Life Bible that is in the seats in front of you that you're welcome to take with you. It's a gift from us if you don't have one or would like one. That's page 922. It says this, "So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he has faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin." Everything we could possibly experience, everything that we've experienced, the range of emotions, the testings, the trials, Jesus has experienced that. We have a God who empathizes with us. We have a God who understands us. We have a God who gets us. He's learned to identify with others, and if we need to learn to identify with others to build compassion. Jesus experienced it all and has a list. We have a partial list. Your list may be different than mine, but I begin to think about my list of experiences, my brokenness and things in this life. And I begin to think, I've been uninvited to parties before. I've been rejected, made fun of, cussed at. This only happened once in my life. I hope it never happens again, but I was once told, go to hell. Those aren't nice words when the person on the other side means it. There's other things. I've been fired. I've been unemployed. I've lost my home. I've lost a grandpa to cancer. My college roommate was killed in an auto accident. I've been criticized, betrayed by a best friend, falsely accused, slandered, and the list could go on. You have your list. You have your things, some of those same things, unwanted, uninvited, rejected, told you aren't loved or that you weren't worthy of love anymore. Divorced, betrayed, battered, slandered, fired, unemployed, maybe told you weren't good enough. You have your list of things. We all have a list, and we could write out what that list is of those things that have taken place in our life. And if we hold on to that list, if we just keep that list, it'll lead to our destruction. It would lead to bitterness and resentment and to our demise. But if we take that list, whatever that list is of yours and mine, if we'll take that list and we'll place it in the hands of God and we'll give him our list, he can take what you thought was your worst thing and it won't be the last word. He gets the last word. Death doesn't even get the last word. If you hold on to your list, it'll fuel bitterness, resentment, and defeat. But if you give your list to God, it will fuel your compassion. It will fuel your compassion for others. I would say this, don't waste your brokenness. Your brokenness can be discarded, thrown away, or placed in the hands of God. It can be used for his glory to help and change the lives of others. We don't ask for these things. We don't want these things. Some things we caused ourselves. It was our fault. Some things were done to us just because we live in a broken world. But don't waste your brokenness. Jesus didn't waste his. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Friends, have we ever thought that the wounds that we have in this life, they're meant to be the healings for others in the same way that Christ comforted us, we're to comfort others? I've been trying to think how to talk about this week, and I don't know, I'm not a composting kind of guy, but I just began to think about, it just came to my mind, compost. And if you've seen my yard, you know I don't compost. If you've seen my garden in my backyard, you'll see everything dead. My whole yard, I used to have a yard back there, and people think it's the dog running back and forth. The dog goes in the front yard, doesn't go in the backyard because you just get muddy if he went back there because everything's died back there. Everything I touch in the yard seems to die. But if you look at our resident composter, Pastor Josh, who's not here today, so I can talk about him. Pastor Josh has the most pristine yard, has the most beautiful garden, produces incredible tomatoes, different things. And I asked him, I said, Josh, do you compost? And he was like, of course. Kind of like, you'd be stupid not to. And I said, explain to me. I've been Googling and looking up, a little bit on what composting. Tell me about the composting process and what it does. He goes, well, one thing is you can use just about anything. Things that you would normally discard, like eggshells. He goes, those things, they're organically, they just make good for compost. Your leaves, your grass, but there's a lot of other things you can throw in the compost, and composting takes time. It just doesn't happen overnight. You don't throw your leaves and your grass in the compost, and the next day you have this beautiful fertilizer for your yard and for your garden. He said it takes time, and these are different bins that you're looking at before, where there's the initial compost, and then the gardener stirs it up and then eventually transfers it to the next, stirs that up and transfers to the next. In the hands of a gardener, and we throw in the trash, a gardener can use to make something beautiful. And friends, in the same way, we can discard our brokenness, we can throw it away, we can try to pretend it didn't happen, or if we put it in the master gardener's hands, he can mix that up, he can move it on to the next, and it takes a process. A good composter takes a couple years for that process to happen. Sometimes the pain and brokenness of our lives, we're not ready for it day one, for it to be used to the glory of God. But if we'll give it to him and continue to trust him with it, he will make something beautiful out of it and make great fertilizer to create great beauty from it. So my question this morning is do you have a compassion compost? Are you throwing it all away? Are you trying to pretend it didn't happen? Or are you giving that stuff that many would throw away, are you giving it to God? Your compassion compost is filled with brokenness. It's where we learn to identify with others. Secondly, we open our eyes. Open your eyes. Jesus saw. Matthew 9:36 says, when he saw the crowds. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. We have to see before we can have compassion. We live in a world right now, there's so much bad news. There's so many bad things happening around us at school, at work, on the news. We see so much death. We see so much violence that we just become desensitized to it and we become numb to it. But Jesus never stopped opening his eyes. When he saw the crowds, when you see the crowds at work, when you see the crowds at school, when you see that kid in the cafeteria line and sitting down by himself at school, it's easy to get desensitized to it, and we see it so often that we just overlook it. Or the homeless, it's so overwhelming, we begin to think, it's just, there's nothing, a dent, I can't even make a dent in it, so we just turn and look the other way. We have to open our eyes. Jesus opened his eyes. And then we have to do the next thing. We have to let ourselves feel. You have to let yourself feel. Again, we get overexposed and we become numb to the pain of others. Sometimes we become numb and indifferent. And we start having a song to our life. And friends, I think all of us have some song. Our life is singing a song. Our life at school is singing a song. Our life at work is singing a song. And I think sometimes our song, even as Christians, can sometimes become, you've lost that love and feeling. You don't recognize that one? I'm going to have to sing it for you. You've lost that love and feeling. Oh, that love and you're not going to sing it with me? Really? Thank you, Greg. You tried. I think we can get to the place it's just gone. We just lose our compassion. We just stop feeling because it's overwhelming to us. There's so much need out there that we just stop allowing ourselves to feel it, that we just ignore it. I think I've shared this before, but it just made such an impression on me when about 3.5 years ago we moved here. And we went to Olathe, where Heather's family lives. And in a cemetery there in Olathe, Kansas, there's a Nazarene section. It's called Resurrection. It's the place of the resurrection part of the cemetery. And it's been 27 years now. My college roommate is buried in that cemetery. And I wasn't going to go by there, but both girls were sleeping in the back. And I thought, they're sleeping. We got a few extra minutes. And so I just dropped by there. I looked at you remember Robbie? I looked at Robbie's grave, and my memories were good. I mean, it'd been a lot of years. I knew he was in heaven. The sting of death was not so great as what it was. And so they were really, I just reflected on some good memories that we had. But when I got back into the car, both girls were awake and both girls were crying. And I was like, what's the matter? And Heather had told them how my roommate 22 years prior to that was taken in an auto accident. Compassion. When we allow ourselves to feel what others feel. When we allow ourselves to enter into another person's world. I just, even the last few weeks, I believe my compassion, our compassion's growing, and hopefully your compassion's growing. But even as I watch people come from a growth group and life group from my mom and dad's church and just be with my parents, for them to take a moment and feel what we felt. Jesus let himself feel. He wasn't emotionless. We don't have a God that didn't feel what we feel, who was a robotic in nature, but he felt what we felt. In John 11:35, your Abundant Life Bible, page 820, just a simple verse. You want to memorize a verse this week? Jesus wept. Jesus wept. John 11:35. Then Jesus wept. He came across Lazarus, who had been dead for 4 days. And of course, we know the miracle of the healing that took place and how he was raised to life and brought out of the tomb. But before that happened, Jesus let himself feel. He let himself feel the brokenness of that moment. He let himself feel what the others felt and what he himself felt. And in fact, if you back up a couple verses, he didn't just feel sadness, but when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. Friends, I'm glad that we have a God who isn't just sad about death, but it angers him. Death angers God. Death makes him angry. Our enemy of death is God's enemy of death. And because death so angered him and so troubled him, he came to do something about it. That's why Jesus came. He came to do something about our death so we might have the hope of eternal life with him. Which leads us to the next thing. He did something. Just do something. Do something. Do anything. Don't just sit there. James, the half-brother of Jesus, said, don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you're just fooling yourselves. That we act upon and feel what he feels and ask Jesus to give us his heart and to have our hearts broken for what breaks his, but then not just to feel bad about it, but to do something about it. You know, for years, maybe in high school or maybe in college, I took a CPR class and I learned how to do CPR and I learned how to do the Heimlich maneuver. Never used CPR, hope I never have to. Probably need to take another class before I tried it out on someone, but there was another thing that was really quite more simple and easy, the Heimlich maneuver, and I was taught in that class the Heimlich maneuver. Didn't use that for years. And about 4 years ago, in a hot summer day in a bowling alley where there was a restaurant, kind of like what we have here, the alley, I noticed a man in a wheelchair, and I was sitting with a guy in my church, and I noticed a guy in a wheelchair to the right, and I saw a waitress panicking. And people didn't know what was going on, but I recognized a little bit of the sign. I'm guessing what happened. Didn't ask for permission, just went over there and got behind his wheelchair and started pumping his stomach, and it came out. And about 6, 7, maybe 7, 8 months later, actually it was about a month before we moved here, there was a going away party for our family, a pool party, and the host of this pool party, he was making steak, and he was cheating a little bit, and he cut off a little piece for himself and was testing it out, and he was talking to the ladies, and they were just looking at him, and he just stopped talking, and they thought it was just joking. In fact, Heather was like, what are you doing? She goes, I wonder, what in the world are you doing? But I recognized it again. I saw the guy, got behind him, and I began to do that, and the steak went about 6 feet. It was pretty impressive. I mean, it went for a ride. And friends, I'd be lying today if I told you it didn't make me feel really good. I'd be lying today if I didn't tell you right now it makes me feel really good to tell that story. Because it felt good to help someone when they needed it. I hope to never have to use it again. But friends, it when we can't just sit there. We can't have the training and not do anything. We can't just read all the ways that we can be like Christ and how we're to be like Christ and grow in our convictions and our confidence and our compassion, but to actually live it out and do it. And I began to think about this church and preparing this last message. And actually, as I was sitting in my office, in the same way that I felt good again thinking about you. I began to think about this church. And I began to think about the ways that you've been compassionate towards our community. I began to think about, and I was actually talking with Pastor Josh about this, and we began to share some stories back and forth about people in our church that you would not know this if I didn't tell it. Because they're not looking for any recognition. I just gave myself recognition. Good boy. They're not looking for any recognition. They just do it. And they don't think they're doing much. I'm going to tell a few stories in a moment, and I'm not asking for permission. I ask for forgiveness. But there's some of your stories. And sometimes we think what we're doing is not that big a deal. We think what we do is so insignificant. Friends, half a life is just showing up. Half a life is just being there. I think back to a month ago and the people from my dad's church and to my mom's church that came and visited them while we were in the hospital. I don't remember much about what they said or the Bible verses or the things they shared with us. You know what I remember? I remember they showed up. I remember they were present. Friends, and we don't realize sometimes the power of our presence. That half a life is just being there. Half a life is just showing up, and it doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but if we're doing it in the way that Jesus describes when he talked about this in Matthew chapter 25, page 756, or page 34, he said this, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then the righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you were doing it for me.'" And I began to think of the little things that are really big things. Guys, in our marriages, it's not the big things. It's not the Valentine's Day where we go all out. It's the little things throughout the year that make all the difference. And I began to think about and Josh, we began to think about some of you. And he'd just come off Monday when all of the students didn't have class on Monday because of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And 11 or 12 students chose to join Josh at McCandless Elementary. And McCandless is kind of our adopted school that we partner with. In fact, if you look out at the coffee bar today, there's a nice big banner that the students made for us to say thank you for the last couple years. I encourage you to go look at that. But on their day off, when they could have been sleeping in the afternoon or doing something else, some of our students, they went to McCandless Elementary and they began to write on desks. They began to I guess graffiti is okay. It's no longer a crime or punishable by the law. Actually, there are tables that they designed that way that you can erase. The students can erase them. So in all the classrooms, they have these tables, and our students, went in and wrote encouraging notes to every single student at every single desk that when they came Tuesday morning to class, they heard and they saw things like encouraging words like, "You're awesome, you're great, God's got good plans." For whatever it was, they began to put those words there. And I was thinking about that, and then Josh sent me a text later after we'd had that discussion. And he said, "What we did was good for McCandless and good for our students." And then Crystal Young's passion blows me away. That's the principal at the school that goes to our church. She knows every student in that school by name and at least a small part of their story. She's an incredible example of what it looks like to care for, and to serve others. Showing up, being present. I thought about Dave and Connie Friesen, who were in our first service, and how for years, until Fernella Tripp, a widowed senior adult, until she moved to Arkansas a few months ago, how for Sunday after Sunday, they brought her to church. And then it passes on and people catch on, and their granddaughter Alyssa, last December, knowing that she had some needs, did 4 different fundraisers to raise money for her to have groceries through the Christmas season in her home. And the compassion passed on from grandparents to grandkids. Paul and Bev Mendoza, who I saw in the hospital in Wichita on Monday, they were not there for themselves, but they were there to see Gary Nelson. And as we had a little break in the action and the nurses need to attend to Gary, we stepped out and I just began to ask Paul and Bev. They're just great people in our church, very unassuming, very quiet. Many of you probably don't know them because they just don't brag on themselves. They don't tell about these things, but I said, how long have you known Gary? What's your relationship with him? And he said, well, Gary and I, on Mondays, we begin to go to lunch every Monday. We have a standing lunch appointment, and I pick him up, and we go to lunch. And I said, man, that's really, really cool. And I said, have you done that for a long time? He goes, well, yeah, but actually before that, it was Maynard Brazil, who's went to heaven a couple years ago, and a big, tall, strong man. And he said, actually, before that, it was Maynard. We would go to lunch. And he goes, actually, there was an overlap. And I thought this was really funny. He said, there was an overlap where they both were going. And anybody that knows Gary Nelson knows he's really soft-spoken. He talks about like this. It's about all you. I mean, you really have to lean in and listen because he doesn't talk very loud. And then you had Maynard on the other end who couldn't hear at all. I mean, and he was just almost deaf. And Gayleen forgave me today, his widowed wife. But he couldn't hear anything, and he said sometimes he'd pull up to pick up Maynard, and Maynard would say, are we going to pick up that guy today? Can't hear a word he says. But that was just Paul Mendoza, being the body of Christ, doing the small things that no one sees. But God sees those things that we do, that are done in His name, out of a loving heart for Him. We talk more. I could keep going on. Don Dimmitt, when his boys were little and it would snow, he'd take his boys out and they would find some senior adults and they would shovel their driveways for him. That's passing it on. And we're never too old to do great things for God, small things that lead to big things. But you've seen Pat Thompson in her 80s who's given of herself to make these mats for the homeless, and some other ladies in our church that do that. And those plastic bags that you bring each and every month, they faithfully put those things together. And the King will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. So let me circle the wagons and back to the beginning today. What's in your compassion compost? We all have hurts, we all have brokenness, we all have things that have happened in our life or things that we've done, and we have a list, and we can take that list and we can put them in God's compost and let that compassion breathe out of that and breathe life into us, or we can hold on to it and make us become bitter and resentful and broken. What's in your compassion compost? What do you need to open your eyes to? Students, when you go to school tomorrow, it's so easy to get caught up in just what's going on in our life and our tests and our friends. But who is someone in your path that you would, the promptings of the Holy Spirit, to invite that person that sits by themselves to your table, or to go sit at that table with that student? Oh, that takes huge guts, I know, to do some of those things. But friends, I believe in all my heart that God has placed each one of us in our place of work, in our schools, in our neighborhoods. He specifically designed us for a group of people that we would be His light, we would be His hands, we would be His feet. And the small things can make all the difference. And you may think it's small, insignificant, but when you're doing it for Jesus and in His name, it means all to Him. What do you need to allow yourself to feel? Maybe it's been a while since you've let yourself feel the pain of others, but what do you need to allow yourself to feel what that other person feels? And what are you going to do about it? You know, sometimes it's easier to do things when we do it in groups and in numbers. So maybe I'd say to some families here today, What could you do as a family together to grow compassion in your lives and in your family's life? Maybe sponsor a compassion child. Maybe volunteer at the Salvation Army. But do something as a family together that you could encourage others. What could you do as a family? What could you do as an example to your kids to help instill compassion into their lives? We're a part of a family of God. What could you do as a growth group, as a small group of people? What could you do together? What could you maybe brainstorm this week when you get together in your groups? What could you maybe ask the question, what would something God have us do together that we could impact and make a difference in someone's life? What can you do together as a family? What could you do as a growth group? And I know things can be overwhelming, and you think, we can't help everybody, and that's true. I love what Andy Stanley says, do for one what you wish you could do for all. Do for one person what you wish you could do for everybody. I think about hospital calls. There's someone in the hospital almost every day from this church. And I can't make all hospital calls, but it doesn't mean I can't make some of them. I can't help all homeless people and give money to all homeless people that are out there, but it doesn't mean I can't help a few of them. I can help one child with a college education, but it doesn't mean I can help both of them. I'm just kidding, Riley. Making sure she's paying attention. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. One little thing, your act of compassion, the things that you do that the Holy Spirit just kind of imprompts you to do, and you think, oh, it's not that big a difference. Maybe a huge difference in that person's life. Let your light so shine before men that they'll glorify your Father in heaven. We're going to move to a time of communion today. And before we do, and as the ushers are making preparations, don't come forward yet, but as you're making preparations with the communion, I'm reminded that probably tomorrow, Tuesday, you'll have forgotten this message. All the hard work I've put into it. Probably the last 4 weeks of this series, here in 3 or 4 days, a lot of it's already forgotten. It will be forgotten. Let's be honest. In 3 days, I'll forget most of what I said. We tend to forget. We're people. Human nature is we forget. So Jesus instituted this sacrament of communion on the night he was betrayed. He set his disciples around. He said, hey guys, for now on, whenever you break this bread and you drink of this cup, when you break bread together and you drink this cup, would you remember me? Because he knows we're forgetful. That's why we take communion. It's a simple act to remember what Jesus has done for us, that he took on our flesh, our human body. He took on our humanity, and he was broken for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities, and by his stripes, by his wounds, we are healed. We remember that when we take communion. And I think today as we take communion as well, and as you're thinking about your kids and what you're going to pass on to your kids and your grandkids, I think about how in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, they gave some ideas about how to do that. In verse 18 of chapter 11, it says, so commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these words of mine. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Put them in places that you'll remember. Put them in places you'll remember to develop Christ in your home, to let Christ permeate your home life, to allow character and convictions and confidence and compassion. Do things that will help you remember. And today, as we're taking the communion, you may be new here today. We have open communion, which means you can take it. You don't have to be a member of this church. Whenever you take the bread and the cup, you're just acknowledging and remembering what Jesus has done for you, and that he died on a cross for you to save you of your sins. So you're welcome to take communion with us. You don't have to take communion. No one judges you if you don't feel comfortable in doing so, but you're certainly invited.